Hi, this is Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to look at the first main stages of sculpting or customizing this brayer model. So today we are going to learn to take it apart and roughly put it back together and create a horse-shaped object. And for this one, my goal is a performance model. So I have to make sure the tack fits well and that it is moving in a position that I want it to. However, I am not in this model going to create something that I would sell or is finely detailed. However, I still want a really nice model. So let's get started on cutting him apart and putting him back together and forming things like the top line and the basic shape. And the one good point about Chemo Sausage here is I can actually use him now for doing weight training because he weighs a lot. There is a lot of fill on this little model. The first thing I did is roughly remove the mane and the forelock, and I scuffed up down the middle of the back and under the belly because I'm going to be adding there, and I wanted to give it just a little more grip for the epoxy. So that was done with a sanding block like this, and you can use the screw. If you're finding this is loose, you just use a screwdriver and tighten this, and it expands and pulls this on better. You gotta be very careful, don't point it towards you, and we're just roughing everything up. And as most of this is gonna be cut off, I'm not too worried about this section right here because I'm taking that off. For cutting, I'm using a cutoff blade, and as you can tell, that could probably hurt quite a bit. So what I do when I'm running it is I take this and just work down into that one, and then move it over and down again, and then down again. And you'll see here, one of the things you can do when you haven't cut through is bend, sorry for bad video here, is bend the neck like this. And when you do that, I see a lot of people do that when they're customizing. What that does is throw off all the muscle. So if you're gonna do something like this, you have to be careful because here you've lengthened the neck and you've created a totally different shape. This is gonna be too long now. So I'm just gonna finish cutting this off and then cutting about 1 centimeter off or more below there. Now with this next cut, I'm going to start right at the top of the withers because I determined this wither is going to be my main point. So it has to start here and then it can go up here. So there's the part I'm cutting off, and the next thing I'm going to do is take off the tail. So by taking off the tail now, it won't distract me on where the tail really should be, and we'll put a tailbone in during construction. This piece is not needed. So now that I have in pieces, I'm going to do more of a review. And I measured the distance from here to here, and also noted that if I take from the ground straight up, the elbow, I'm pretty much hitting the withers. But if I look at this one and take it straight up, the withers are going to be more forward, and when I do the measurement from there to there, again, the withers need to be more up here. So this is going to be my wither point right around here. So that's going to give him a bit longer of a back. Based on that, I check the withers and where the loins or croup are, and I'm going to measure that, double check it here, and again, it tells me that the withers need to be more forward. So now that I have this, the first thing I'm going to do is see where this head is going to be based on the more forward withers. Now these sticks come in very helpful. I can measure from there to the withers. I can measure from here to here. I can do all sorts of measurements to decide where the best place is to stick this neck and other parts. And this is, you'll review the model, and these sticks are so helpful just to get the base down on where stuff should be. Now in places like Michael's, you can get aluminum wire or mesh, different wires, and you can use that to hold stuff together. Sculpting, I'm going to be using Epoxy Sculpt. It's a 2-part epoxy putty, and this stuff lasts forever. It's pretty bad shape, but it's probably 10 years old and still working. So I have an equal amount of both, and then I'm going to mix them well until it's well blended. Once you've finished blending, just take a little tiny bit of that, if you don't have any left, and put that aside, and that'll allow you to see how it is setting. You can always test it. I do that with glue too, so I know if it's dry or not. Then I'm going to take a little piece of that and my wire, and I'm going to put it under inside here and up against the body so that the rest is sticking out. Well, I've pressed that right in there. There's the wire coming out. Now, depending on how you want the head, you can move that wire around, but you want it firmed in there. Then we're going to put a bunch more of the epoxy on there, and we're going to stick it in there and mold it in. So you can see I have quite a bud up there to fill the hole, and this is holding it on, this is solid. Really push that up there to make sure it's solid. Then I'm going to put him down and wedge him with some stuff to keep the head where I want it. And at the same time, I'm going to check my measurements. Two of the measurements I want to check is from here to here, which is about 1.5, and I'm going to go in quarters. Then I'm going to take this and work it around here to get an idea how long this top line is. And then with the stick from the other guy, I'm going to measure the same thing. So if this one was 1.5, I want this one to be slightly more with his head forward. So that should be about 2. And I don't want his nose tucked in as much, but I still want it down. So it would just be a slight bit different. And you can see there that his head is not, I just want it about there, as opposed to under and behind like that. And again, we may have to let that dry for about 15 minutes or so it sets up enough. Then I can move it and straighten it just to make sure it's all in the right place. But you have working time for about an hour, at least a half an hour. You'll learn with yours how to work it. So once it's almost set, I'm going to stand him up and make sure his head is straight. I've got him wedged up here, and I keep measuring the distance from where the elbow is going to be to the withers, measuring here to make sure everything's measured correctly. And that's where I can really see this area needs some re-sculpting. But that's okay, it's there. I can take that back down once we have everything in order. So I just want to make sure everything is properly set before going any further. So I'll keep an eye on them and tweak them as I need to. And let them dry. You'll notice I still haven't cut this leg off, and that is because I wanted to do the head first in the right place and figure out exactly where it is, because that's going to have to move quite a bit back. So at this point, I'm going to take a piece of, you can use tin foil. This is actually for sculpting. It is a soft mesh, and I'm just going to stick a little in there to fill in some space. This metal is very soft and flexible and cuts with scissors. And I'm just going to fill that hole in a bit. And that is just going to save me on epoxy putty. So that just takes up a little space. And again, you can use tin foil for that too. One thing you want to make sure is it is not in the way where you might be cutting later. So if I need to take that down or sand it at all, I want to make sure that is not in the way and it's well in there. So now I'm going to mix up some more epoxy sculpt. This next step, I've mixed up quite a bit of epoxy sculpt because I'm doing two things here. The first is I want to fill in the neck area, but I do not want it to come out because I'm going to be working on the muscles afterwards. But what I want to do is fill that in so it is rock hard, but inside the neck. I'm going to check my measurements. And you can see when you look at it straight on, there's still indents, and that's so I can do proper muscle review afterwards. Right now, I just want to make sure it is solid and in place. So when you're working with epoxy sculpt, a little bit of water on your fingers gives you a lot more control, and it is wonderful for shaping. You don't need any fancy stuff, just water. And then we're going to take the sticks, double check all our measurements. And with some more of this, what I want to do is work it along the top line for the sole purpose of seeing where my top line is going to be. So it's just going to be a thin stripe, and it's going to be the spine or backbone of this horse. So the only thing I care about is what it looks like coming through here. So the withers are going to be there, and then I'm going to build that up. Again, this is going to be sculpt later. This is just the backbone, nothing else. so that we know where the top line is. Everything else should just kind of fall off and it'll be filled in later. Even with just the start, you can see it's looking more like a horse now. One thing you want to make sure you do is right along the spine all the way to the ears, that you have that going straight. And if there's a turn in the neck, that's okay. But if you got to make sure that the line is going all the way down, up through the neck and between the ears. Now you can see I'm not filling any of this in. This is just to create a top line. And you can sand it or later or whatever, but right now I'm trying to establish this. And I'm taking measurements off the other horse using those sticks I had and trying to get this. And I'm going to take a little bit more down here as well later, but I'll do that when I do the leg. So first, I'm just working on the neck and the back, the spine. And that is the most important part. And because I moved the withers forward, it's given more room for a saddle on this model as well. If you've mixed up extra, you can just find places to put that you know it's going to be. If you have space, you can always add a little extra somewhere else, or use it for something else or throw it out. But also, when you're doing this, make sure you don't go to the areas where you're going to be, you know, with muscles or any detail. That'll be added on and sculpted later. You want all the underside done. Basically, the spine is fine, but everything around here is going to be looked at better and sculpted after. Now this will still change a little bit. We have the withers here. It scoops in a bit at the back. It goes up at the loin and down at the croup. Now, Arabians are a little flatter on the back, but they are not flat bottomed. I've seen too much like that. You can see they still have a round bum, and sometimes they look flatter when they're stretched out. But this is where I'm going to base for now and let it dry fully. And if you can see on the top, it is just basically a stripe down the top, and I put my extra right here. Now that that's set, I am going to go take off his back leg. As this is thick here, I've taken it through as much as I can, and then I'm going to just take a saw like that to take off the rest. Now we look at it again once I move that back to where I want it, and you can see there's going to be way too much here and here as well. I think I will be taking this part off with a sander so that this will fit in somewhere back like this. The other thing I'm going to do is drill a hole right in the middle there for a piece of wire. So as I'm going to move that back on an angle, this hoof is going to have to flex a little more through here. So I have a heat gun, just a tiny little heat gun here, and I'm just going to heat and move that up just a little bit. Now when you're using a heat gun, you only need it on there for a few seconds. You can see mine actually bubbled a tiny little bit, so I probably got it a little too close, but that's no problem because that hoof needs a bit of work anyways. But all I did was apply the heat gun and then just put some pressure to bend that hoof forward. Now I'm going to determine where I want this and put a hole in here and then a matching hole in here. So if we look at that leg that's on the ground, you can see there's a slight tilt forward. And if I look at the model, that means I want it something like that. And I want it even, so when it's on the ground, the other two legs are also on the ground. And I'm going to be moving it back, so about there. So I have a hole drilled there, and I want a hole drilled back here, near the back. And I'll be reshaping this whole area here. When you're working with this, you're going to get buildups of plastic. I had a lot more on that, and it gets very, very hot. So make sure you cut that off, and I use something like that to cut the plastic off my tools as I work. Now I mixed up a small amount of epoxy sculpt, and I have a little piece of wire, and it's aluminum, and then I'm going to put some in this end of the leg and stick the wire in. If I roll it into a little snake, I can get more in there. And try to get as much as you can into the hole first, and then put the wire inside. I have that stuffed. I'm going to put it in and see how much wire I need. And the more the better. That's a long piece. It goes right into the body. Then I'm going to add some epoxy in there. And you have to be careful or it could be floating around in your model. So get some right in where the hole is and then stick the wire in. I want to make sure he's vertical. I'll put something to support him. And I'm going to move this leg into the position where I want it. I'm not going to worry about anything sticking out. I can sand it later. It's on a slight increase going that way. And if I look at the picture here, you can see that his hock should be somewhere right behind there, and that's about where it would be. So it's a slight incline in. Move it around. Make sure he's standing up perfectly vertical. It's gonna be a she. I guess I should stop calling it a she. Take a picture from the back, make sure it's straight. Once I have it there, I'm just gonna let it dry. Don't be worried if you have stuff like this going on, because this butt needs to come down into there. This will all be fixed. The leg should be there. This point should be moved back a little bit. So I will deal with that later. The first thing I want is a horse in the basic shape of what we want. And also, because it's a performance horse, I don't want to go over the top with changes. For example, in this case, I'm not going to change his face or her face. So I just want her in a correct position for performance. And now I'm just going to let that dry overnight. And the other thing, the fact that he's standing here, she's standing fine here right now. When I take away the support, it may be a little wobbly, but those feet really do need some work. So when I'm doing some final touches, I'll make sure she stands nice and properly and solid. So now I'm on to day 2, and what I want to do is look at this model much more closely now and decide what needs to be done. So what I've done is printed out references, and this one's from Jennifer Buxton actually. Don't like the way he's overflexed, but this gets the only picture I've seen that shows me this back leg properly. So I've looked for pictures of the underside and the upside of horses and the chest. Just different various horses. Now I never look at an actual model horse. I always work off real horses, and actually working with a real horse to know how things feel is very useful. And again, this kind of stuff takes practice as well. As I want to prefer a performance horse, I want to make sure stuff fits. And if you can see here, how much space needs to be built up for a saddle to fit. In other words, his right now, because I just did the spine, his back needs a lot of work in here. So before I start building him up, what I want to do is realize this is going to come out here and stop somewhere around here. So if I take a marker, I can decide that I want this sanded back to about here. I may work a little bit on the chest and sand some of this off down here. And on the other side, where it really bothers me, I am just going to remove this section here so that I can rebuild it. Because just looking at it, you can see how bad it is. And if we look at a horse's real chest, for example, down here, you can see that's just going to come up. So I just need a little bit here, and there's going to be a lot more sculpting in just that one spot. But if I look at his other side, his chest is nowhere near as bad. It just needs a small amount of work. So first I'm going to grind it down a bit more. So here it is after my first real grinding. You see, I removed the chest completely. And because this is going to come down to here, I've lowered the shoulder a little bit. I want to keep that angle. But right now I'm at a bit of a loss exactly what that's going to look at. So I'm going to do some build up first, and I may need to grind more. So I've done that. I've taken that down. I've taken the chest down just a little right here. I've taken a lot off the back and a lot off right here. And you can see how it's coming along. So right now what I'm going to do is mix up some epoxy putty, because at this point I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like with this down here. I need to get more bulk in here and the elbow so I can actually get a better idea. So I'm going to use those sticks and add some epoxy putty to try to get everything in proportion. But you can see the difference already with this big chunk taken off here. Now when you're sculpting, it's all about seeing the various parts. And again, if you have a real horse, you can see it more. But look at a specific area and work on that area. just learn to feel, and if you've run your hands over a real horse, you'd know what's going on. And sometimes, I mean, you don't need to know the names of all the different parts of the horse, just look at what's going on. So here, because I'm lowering this muscle needs to be down a bit. So to make it look real, for me, I need to first lower that muscle. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of clay on there with some water. The water is your friend here. That'll get all your stuff going on okay right there. I'm just gonna add something in there and I'm gonna work with that. And I mean, I'll work that a lot more. And then what I'm gonna do is, this is where the stomach is gonna come down to. I'm gonna build up the stomach a little down, a little. So it's just a little thicker. And I have the picture underneath the model of what it should look like under the stomach. So the first thing I want to do is work around this area. I'm going to build up some muscle, work just around here until it's visually easier for me to see what I'm working on. And I'll just keep playing with that. And again, just put on the clay and massage it with water with your fingers. And just keep building it up and playing with it. And the reason I'm starting here is because I could do all this to look nice and then realize I wanted to drop it more. So getting the body correct first is really important. Or you're gonna find you've done work that's not gonna work future on, because as I said, this leg is getting shorter. So I have to work on that first. So I've added where the shoulder I want to be. I've lowered this, lowered that, put on a little bit of muscle. Now I'm gonna work in the area and fill that in. So as you can probably see from the top, there needs to be a lot of work filled in. Just like here, I've added this piece for this area right here. So I'm just going to smooth that out. I've given a little more depth to the body here. Not a lot, just a little. And you can see this side I'm not doing much with. This leg is still free. But what I want to do is build up areas at a time. Smooth it into the body and then realize, okay, well, this all needs filling in. This all is desperately in need of filling in. So I'm just going to work along those areas. Fill it in and keep looking at my reference photos. Reference photos are so important. And again, this takes a lot of practice, but you'll never get good at it until you start. Give it a lot of tries, a lot of practice. Then you're gonna look for things like this muscle coming up here and how it goes around here. So I put a bit of clay through here and I'm gonna work that in, plus some more along here. And again, I'm just doing a lot of circular massaging to get the clay stuck and then just pushing it around, making sure my fingers are very wet. Building up this area because this model is so skinny, there's so much to build up. So I've got the line going here. I'll just work on that a little bit more off screen. But I'm just trying to get enough clay in there so that I can push it around and make it look like a neck again. So I've let that dry fully since it was holding up the leg. Normally I would start working on it after the first hour, but I wanted this one to dry fully. So you can see what I've done right here. I don't want to work on the chest till I get the shoulder figured out. I've put a line in here for the shoulder, but it still needs to be worked in. I started the first line of the muscles here. And you can see from the back, there's still quite a bit of rounding to do, filling in. And this side I have barely done anything with. I just used the extra just as a filling because I had some left over, but I wanted the leg in place. So the next thing I'm gonna do is look at it again. And again, I may pull out the measuring sticks and check it with photographs. And one thing I would like to do is move this leg forward just a little. You can see in this photo and all the others I've seen that that foot really should be just in front there. So I'm gonna apply a little bit of heat with a heat gun, just lightly, only for a very short time or it'll burn, there and there, and just straighten out these a little bit, or not straighten, but pull it forward. So I played with this leg a little bit, lifted that over a little bit, and I moved this one back a little. Now, because I want to get this done by February, I don't want to be doing a lot of rework. I have to determine where to draw the line on how much work I'm going to do. You can spend a year on this or a few days. That is up to the amount of work you want to put into it. So now I'm going to go and put in some more filler here, work on this piece, work on the neck. I'm leaving the chest till later because I want to see what the rest looks like. But I'm going to just add a little bit more epoxy now. So when you're working, and this time I just worked in this area right here, I am massaging and doing circular motions to smooth that on, and then I'm pushing it around to get the basic muscular. And if you follow various photographs, you can see the shapes. So I may need a little more in there. The problem was this wasn't fully connected, so I'm waiting for that to connect. But when I'm working with this, I realized something's off, and this looks too wide to me. So I got out my sticks and measured. This measurement's fine, that's fine, but this needs to be in a little. So once that's dry, I can take a sander and make this a little thinner before putting any more buildup of putty on there. So right now, that's all I've worked on that one. And you can see the butt's starting to be butt-shaped at this point. And once it's dried for a little while, it is easier to push around just a little to be able to put indents and more muscling in there. It's better to do that once it's partially dry. Now that this is dry, what I am doing is taking my measuring tool here, comparing what I see over here with what I've got over here, and I'm drawing pencil lines on it to where I want it to be. And you can see with that leg how straight and thin it looks in that position. So this one right now is too thick through here. And if I look at the top, and I'm comparing that to a top line, for example, say this, I need to build it up a little back here. This is starting to look better. I can do a little bit more work and shaping through here. This side of the butt hasn't been done yet, just that side. So I just keep comparing it to different pictures and adding, and then once it's dry, I can subtract as well. And I do that by sanding. So I'm gonna take the next round, I'm still on day 2, do one more sanding and one more application of the putty. So here is the same leg after taking it down. But one of the things I find is I don't find that leg is in very well, so I am gonna put a pin right up through here, just drill a hole, glue in another piece of metal just to hold that to be extra sure. So instead of drilling, I took this cutting tool from the Dremel and cut a slice through here, and then I'm just going to take some epoxy glue and put a piece of stiff wire in there. So this is the next morning after doing all this bulk work, and I would consider that the end of stage 2. I've done the analysis and I filled it in. He started to get a little bum. I have a top line, I have the basic shape, and the last part of this stage is I am going to remeasure everything against my reference material. It could be one or more, and I'm gonna use my sticks. I use these a lot against both of them. I'm gonna measure things like from here to here, here to here, here to here, all these different areas to try to see how close I am. And I also have to say, if you have purchased a head, and I'll put a link where you can buy these. You can actually just cut that off and put a new head on if you don't want to deal with that. I am probably going to replace the ears, but I'm going to do that later. And notice I haven't touched the feet or the legs other than to put them in a shape at this point. Right now, what I want is to know the shape of the body, the top line, the back line, the underline. And the next stage after this, and in the next video, we'll look at working on a little more detailed sculpting, doing the muscles, what I look for, and get him almost to the point of primer. So that's it for this video. And if you're ever at this stage, this is a great time to ask other people for help. And I'm one of them. You can just shoot them a message, and some people will charge, some will not. And just ask, how close am I? Have I got this right? So before putting all your details on, this is a really important step You know, is everything in the correct position? Because if you go further and do all the details and you find that this is too short or too long and needs to be extended, or your neck, one of the things I see a lot is people's necks are way too long. So shoot a message out at this stage to people and ask, hey, be brutally honest with me. Do I need to make any changes before I do details? So thanks for joining me, and check out these other videos, and I'll see you next time for the next stage of this guy.